Good afternoon. I'd like to call the work session to order. I will call our work session on behalf of City Council to order. Madam Chair?
I'd also like to call the school board, Suffolk City School Board, to order for this joint session.
I'd like to thank everyone for being here, and we are going to turn it straight over to our city manager and to our school superintendent. Mr. Roberts, if you start off, please.
Thank you, Mayor, Madam Chair, board members, council members, Superintendent. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm very excited to introduce in just a moment our key speaker and to present the topic, which is the primary point of discussion for the joint meeting. I was going to make some introductory remarks about the project and the slide, but I think the folks at RMM have done a great job, so I won't steal their thunder. Before I turn it over to Dwayne Harbour, Superintendent, Dr. Gordon, do you wish to make any other opening remarks?
I don't know, sir.
Let's go. Right, okay, let's do it. Good. We share that same level of enthusiasm. So with that, I'd like to invite Dwayne Harbour with RMM Architects. They're no stranger to the City of Suffolk or the school board. RMM has done a tremendous amount of work for us, highly respected in the region. Through a competitive process, we've identified this firm and this team to help us with a very important project to help us revolutionize the way that we develop long-term facilities investment planning in the City of Suffolk. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Harbour.
Thank you so much, and members of the school board and city council, it's a pleasure to be here and present to you our study. And actually, it's not the it's just the overview of what we're going to study. We haven't started any of the work yet, so I'll just go into our process and talk about who we are as our team. Our approach to this study, and then any discussion that you all want to have, any questions, I'll try to answer those. My name is Dwayne Harbour. I'm the president and CEO of our RMM Architects. And as Mr. Roberts has told you, we've done quite a bit of work here in the city of Suffolk over the years. Personally, my history goes back many years, farther than I'd like to admit, as far as my work here. I'll be control of the overall study. Jeff Harris will be assisting me as principal in charge. Mark Probst is here with me this evening. Mark's one of our partners, and he'll be in charge of the facility assessment piece. Also, we have on our team a nationally recognized firm, Cooperative Strategies, led by David Sturtz. He'll be our planner and demographer for the study. And so a little bit more about David. His firm is nationally known, and they work all over the country doing these kinds of studies, so he's our specialist on the team. He'll be involved in some of the things highlighted there: master planning, community engagement, demographics, educational standards, and facility assessments along with us. He's no stranger to Virginia, has worked across the state with 15 or more clients here in Virginia, including some of your neighbors nearby. Also assisting on this, we'll have two full teams to do these assessments from our staff at RMM and our home base in Chesapeake. So we've identified 3 for each team, and we are planning to go and do these facility assessments along with our engineers during the spring break this year, which is when the students won't be there. It'll be our most opportune time to go in as a team and do these facility assessments. We do have an in-house cost estimator that will be assisting us with the project, and he's very good with his cost estimates. We have a whole team of consultants, engineers. We have civil engineers, MSA, Thompson Consulting Engineers for mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, and Spate Marshall Francis for structural evaluations. And these are the same guys that we use on designing new facilities across the state and other assessments that we do. So they are school consultants. So getting into our project approach, it's a big project. And so how do we go about a division-wide study like this? We start with very focused planning with both the city and the school division right from the start, and being very inclusive. And really it gets down to a kind of a simple question overall is, do you have the facilities you need in the locations you need them based on their condition, their capacity, the educational adequacy, and the anticipated population change. It's kind of a big picture question. So we break it down into 3 basic phases. First phase being the initial project planning and data collection, which includes our assessments and demographics. And we think that we'll be complete with that phase by late August. It could come sooner than that. We're not going to delay. And if it does, we'll continue right with the next phases following that. And then we go into our master plan options development. We would hope to be done with that by early October. And then a couple of months later, having some refinements, recommendations, and conclusions before the end of the year in December. So if I break those phases down a little bit for you, we start out with a plan for planning. We'd want to meet with the steering committee, and which would include members, stakeholders, and members from the city and the school division to kind of map out what we want to accomplish in the study. And then we set about doing all the data collection, which a big chunk of that is our facility assessments, the demographic research, and then research of the division and what the standards are here, and those kinds of things. And ultimately, we'll have a background report as part of this phase, which summarizes all those studies and documents them. And that's very important to the process, is to have a good documentation of all the work that we do. So in that data collection, we'll include enrollment information by grade for the last 10 years, through transfer, charter, any non-public schools. We'll look at the elementary catchment areas and boundaries, live birth data, population trends, housing data and housing yields, school division demographic profiles, the GIS information, and all the school-specific data for class schedules and curriculum programs, those types of things. Also in the data collection, we know that there are some things that you want some assistance in kind of defining a methodology for, and so we will give you our recommendation for how you determine capacity calculations, the student generation rates for the housing types, and also cost per pupil. So when we go into the facility assessments, we're going to first need to collect all the documents that we can, mostly the floor plans. We were just talking about how we'd go over here and try to get all the documents that we can from all the schools that we're studying, from the school division. Some of them are very old, so we might have to do a little bit of research, and sometimes the building official or the Department of Education will have plans that we can use, whatever we can get, particularly for the older schools, but all the more modern schools we do have a lot of the plans for. We'll do our field surveys and document the as-built conditions, identify what spaces are being used for currently. We'll look at the school in terms of its educational adequacy and functionality. As school designers, we are very aware of the things that don't quite work right in school, so we'll identify those. The capacity calculations, we'll do our condition assessments that will include architectural and structural, both exterior and interior. We'll do the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing reviews, life safety systems, security, technology, and then the outside the site assessments. So when we put in our proposal, we had 3 levels that we were working with, and through our discussions, we decided that none of the schools, the level 1 is the most lean study, going with more complex as you go, level 2, then level 3. And so all our studies are in either level 2 or 3, and we only have 2 schools that are in the level 2. So the majority of the ones we're studying are the more comprehensive in level 3. So what we do in level 2 is interview the school system staff and the maintenance staff, and we'll look at, have a comprehensive site inspection, looking at all the existing conditions and space usage, recommending the various site improvements. We'll look at the major building systems for energy efficiency, ADA compliance, code compliance. And then we'll talk about deferred maintenance, or the improvements that are going to be necessary in the school division over time. If we think that a chiller is going to need to be replaced in 5 years down the road, and that's a cost, we're going to identify that cost so that you'll put it in your planning. And so in addition to all those things that I've listed in level 2, for level 3, which is most of the schools, we'll also look at the reports and surveys that the school division has done for hazardous materials. We'll complete the technology assessment, which includes intercom and clock and phone systems. And then we'll have a summary report with a facility condition index for each of the schools so that we can rank those and show you how they look compared to one another. In terms of document collection, these are the schools that we are including in the study. And you can see that all of these are level 3 studies with the exception of Creekside and Hill Point, which are newer schools. We have CAD drawings for those checked off in green. Many of those schools our firm has completed, so that's a value there to have those. The others, we will go and do some research, and we'll scan the drawings that we have, and as I mentioned, we may have to do some research for some of the really older ones, and they become more challenging than the newer schools for sure. So when we go into a facility, we'll go in and confirm all the existing uses. We'll use a scalable tool to find out the square footage of each space, because these square footages are relevant when you start looking at capacity of each classroom and whether they're large enough for the use. And we'll do an overall capacity analysis and look at any conceptual planning in the later stages. On the architectural assessments, we're going to look at exteriors, roofs, walls, doors and windows and so forth on the outside. Where is the water penetrating, if it is? And let me say this, none of these pictures in here are of Suffolk Public Schools. I want to make sure everybody understands. So we'll also look at structural and really the entire envelope. Look at areas where water penetration may exist or unsafe conditions. Handicapped accessibility. That's usually a problem in more of your older schools. We'll look at the interior ceilings and walls and the finishes and assess their long-term durability or condition. We have 2 interior designers that are on the teams that are accustomed to doing this and do all their schoolwork. And then, as I mentioned, we have a long history here and know many of the schools, so one of the advantages, I think, is that we can establish is there parity amongst the schools based on what we know of the schools that we've done and the more recent schools that have been completed. We also look at the educational functionality of these schools, and if there are blind corners or if the admin cannot see to the exterior or things like that. We'll identify those and mention those as areas that need some attention. We're going to do the capacity analysis. There are different ways to determine the capacity for schools. The state has their standards, and that's what we're going to follow unless we're told to do something different than that. Our programmer planner works all over the nation, so they've seen different methodologies for capacity planning. But these are, the state has forms for elementary, middle, and high school. And so they have capacity that's determined by the state numbers that you see in the left column are the standards of accreditation. And so they are the highest pupils per classroom recommended for those types of spaces. The operating capacity of the division may vary from that, but here in Suffolk, you follow the state standards The only exception being that there could be some Title I schools that are required due to federal funding to have lower teacher-pupil ratios. We'll look at these mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems. Our engineers will come in and they'll help to prioritize the needs based on their observations and help us with estimating probable construction costs for any improvements. And they'll roughly follow the same kind of level assessments that I described to you earlier for these plumbing, mechanical, and electrical evaluations. We have our civil engineer on board, and they will be looking at stormwater management and flooding type issues. They'll look at utilities, both sewer and water, and what's available on site or through public. They'll look at the playgrounds and athletic facilities and ball fields and such, and see if there are any issues of concern, as well as environmental issues and wetlands and Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area buffers. They'll look at the site in terms of traffic circulation, turn lanes, bus loop separation, so forth, and handicapped accessibility. So as we start into phase 2, this is where we start to have looked at the overall data collected in phase 1 and what is it telling us to do. And so we'll present whatever findings we have to the steering committee and to the board, and there'll be some dialogue probably with community and then discussion of these options development. And always inclusive and collaborative in our efforts with both city and school division on these thoughts. So as we develop the options, we're going to apply the demographic information, the program data, and also the condition, the physical and adequacy of the facility. We will apply that educational framework to the whole thing as well and look at equity amongst schools, and it could be anything that comes out of this. It could be renovations, it could be consolidations, additions, new schools, replacements, programmatic. We are going to have a very objective analysis with this. We'll present the information, and others will make the decisions based on the information that we put forth. So we'll also provide costs for whatever options seem to make sense. We have done some of these studies before where in the options development we have shown additions or some site planning, and we do little sketch options if there's a decision that a school needs to be renovated or an addition needs to be added, and we're told this is what we think is the best next step for this area or this school. We'll take the time in this study to do something like this, and the main purpose is that we can accurately estimate the cost. We don't want to just ballpark something out there that you can't use, so we like to actually apply a concept that works so that the costs are accurate when we project those. And so we'll go through and do cost estimates for any of those particular options that we propose or recommend. And these would be, we go through and identify all the hard costs, the construction costs for the project, apply a contingency factor, and then we have the soft costs that are included with every project, testing, inspection, professional services, all those things. And then depending on where the project is, the best time frame for the project to be completed will escalate to that date. So you have some idea of what the cost would be at that point in time in the future. So we'll continue on with phase 2 with those options development and then presenting those to the steering committee, and then in turn once we have some direction to the board. So then phase 3, we move into the actual facility master plan options and our recommendations. And so we'll develop those and present first to the steering committee. and then in turn to the more full master plan report, and then to the board. So this phase is really about taking recommendations, refining those, reviewing those, and coming back until we are on the same page to go forth with a recommendation and present those to the policymakers. I think in the final product, we want to make something that is very actionable. It's useful to you all. And it's also defendable, that we have the backup documentation that we need in order to justify any suggestions or recommendations. And it's a comprehensive study. And I think the final format that we would like to present is something that is easy to consume. It's easy to read and understand. It's not too complex with lots of spreadsheets and data, endless data. So if anybody wants to get into the backup and see the detail, we'll have that in our backup information, but we want to present a very clear summary, executive summary. And so that is the presentation, ladies and gentlemen, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions. David Sturts, who does some of the demographics and talks about housing yields and that kind of thing, is not here. But he has promised that if I need him, I can phone a friend and get an answer. And so we'll try to help out if you have a question that I can't answer.
Mr. Manager?
Mayor and Madam Chair, Board and Council members, if I can ask Dwayne to be on close standby, I'm going to ask Teal Hansen, Director of Finance, to walk through just a few more slides, and then I'll turn it back over if any of the board or council members have any questions for either Mr. Harbour or Ms. Hansen. Primarily, hopefully, we've got you so excited about it. The next question you have is, okay, how do you propose to pay for it? That's what we're going to walk through. I have asked the mayor and council to place 2 items on their 7 p.m. business meeting agenda tonight. The first one, by ordinance funds the study just shy of $400,000, and then there's a related item that is lays out the recommendation for some additional expenditures on school facilities. So Teal, if you can walk through that.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Good afternoon, Mayor and Madam Chairwoman and members of School Board and City Council. I am here to lay out the funding for this plan and study that you have heard about, and as the manager mentioned, some additional transfers. So the 2 schools, the 2 newest schools in the system, Florence Bowser Elementary and Cherry Middle School, have been completed, and those capital projects are complete. There is some additional funding left on those projects to the tune of about $884,000. As you can see there, what's left on Florence Bowser and what's left on Fred Cherry. Those are additional funds, and we are proposing that these be transferred. So the first transfer is to fund this study. And so the city manager is proposing that the following happen to fund the $398,246 cost of this study. We would like to transfer $298,246 off of the Fred Cherry Middle School project, which is unspent funds on that project, and propose to transfer $100,000 out of the city's planning department to pay for a portion of this study. So with those 2 together, City Council will have an ordinance to approve these 2 transfers on their City Council meeting tonight, and it will be item number 9 on the consent agenda. The second set of transfers, which will be item number 10 on the City Council's consent agenda tonight, will be to take the remaining $585,967.02 off of the Florence Bowser Elementary and the Fred Cherry Middle School capital projects and transfer them to the school's major systems repairs and replacements capital project. The intent of that funding, once it's transferred, is to be used on safety system repairs, installation of fuel tanks, and installation of fiber infrastructure with the amounts listed up there on the screen. If you have any additional questions about the details of what those catch-all categories mean, the superintendent can address those for you. The recommendation is to approve both of these transfers in order to close out the 2 capital projects with the schools that are done, and to both fund this study as well as some major systems repairs and replacements that the school has need of And if you have any questions, I'm happy to address them. Thank you.
Thank you,
Any
too.
questions?
Mayor, that's all we have. If you want to open up for questions.
All right, we'll open up for questions, and this time I don't have buttons, so just kind of, Mr. Mitnick.
Mr. Harbour, I did not hear anything in your proposal about rezoning, and we were led to believe that there would also be a study on rezonings of population. Is that something that we can expect?
We do not have a full-fledged rezoning part to our study. However, I have communicated that the information that we will be gaining from this with demographics and so forth would be useful information that could be considered by the steering committee in the way of rezoning interests. So there is an additional fee through David Sturtz and Cooperative Strategies to do a full rezoning. But I think if it were me, my advice would be to get through the study, see what we present before you go that route, and see if there's information that you can use in kind of a common sense approach to rezoning.
Linda, while you're on that, Mr. Harbour, how about as far as developments that we've already approved in the city that haven't gone forward? Would that be included in your analysis?
Yes, the proposed developments, ongoing developments will be part of this demographic enrollment projection study. So
Up to a time frame? I mean, you just pick a time frame and say up to this point?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't met to discuss how far out we'd like those projected enrollments to go.
Okay.
Usually 10 years is about as far as you can go with something like that, and 5 years is more of an accurate assessment, but it's very hard to project much beyond that. But I think that will be one of the things we'll establish in our first meeting.
Right. Okay, good, thank you.
If I could just go back to what Board Member Mitnick said earlier. I guess I'm assuming that the information, the data will be within the study that would give you the ability to look at giving you more knowledge as to how to rezone if the board chose to go forward. Am I correct in that?
I believe there's going to be sufficient information in there to make some good, solid assessments relative to rezoning. It's just not that it's what we would provide as a full-fledged rezoning effort in a study, because that is more involved.
Understood. Councilman Goldberg?
No, I was going to, you answered part of it earlier, but I know RM very well for many, many years, and they have done, I've seen some of your work in the past, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they come up with. They're an outstanding organization, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Sir, appreciate that.
Okay. Councilman Goldberg? I mean, Dimon? I'm sorry, I've been looking right.
Came next.
Yeah, just a few questions for you. And going back to Mr. Mitnick's question in regards to rezoning or redistricting and time frame wise, I think anything under 10 years is, I'm not going to say it's a waste of time, but it's not going to accomplish much because most of these projects aren't going to occur within 10 years. So we need to ensure that we're not coming up with a study that by the time schools are funded and funding's available to actually initiate it or complete it, then the study we've done is basically not that relevant at that time. To what Councilman Johnson said in regards to development that's already approved, developments in the pipeline, I assume that you will use all that information to determine where the future student growth will be, and more importantly, the student generation rates based on that particular type of development, being single family or apartments or whatever we have zoned
Yes, sir.
within that zoning designation.
That is correct. And as far as new schools, a study can also evaluate capacity at different schools. So it could, that's the existing schools factor into that as well.
And I would also assume that you, once you figure out the generation rate and where that capacity is needed, then you will analyze the existing facilities to determine the most economical way to accommodate that capacity, be it enlarging, improving, or tearing down and building another facility somewhere else.
Yes, sir.
correct
We'll
assumption?
yes, we'll have simultaneous efforts going while the demographic work is going. We'll be doing the facility assessments. And part of that is to look at each school. We'll be looking at the core capacity of the school. Do we have room to even expand on the site? Are there, to add classrooms if we need to? What is the overall condition and age of the facility relative to the money you would spend to renovate or expand it? All those would factor into the equation so that the committee would have good working knowledge to establish what the best next steps are.
Well, I'm envisioning this being a long-term strategic plan to address capacity issues for the city a lot further out than 10 years. And to do that, all that information needs to be there. You also mentioned the career and tech high school study. Is that something that's included in there?
Let's see,
Anything specifically relating to career and technology?
CCAP is included.
Yes.
Okay, because to me, that's anyhow, I think it's needed. When we talked about, and I know you did mention energy efficiencies. I would assume that's in existing facilities and future facilities. I assume you're probably aware of energy performance contracting, the state sponsored, but we have a study that was completed. So I would assume that you would acquire that information and be able to use it in your analysis, because it'll be much more detailed than you're going to do with a superficial energy analysis.
That's correct. Any of that existing information that's available, we want to take that and not ignore that, make sure we acknowledge what they've done and incorporate it into the study.
And I think what's critical to me is that everybody in this room is on the same page as far as what our expectations are. I think the worst thing that can happen is this study comes back and somebody says, I think you did a really good job, but why didn't we address this? And I will question the validity of the study because there are certain topics or concerns that were not addressed. So the planning process of it is absolutely critical, because when this thing comes back with the final product, I hate to say it, but everybody kind of needs to be on the same page with, yes, we have addressed everything that we thought we needed to address.
I'm on board with you with that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Manager?
If I could also ask Andy to go back to RMM's presentation, pull up slide 8 specifically. I think it really, if you had to do all this in one slide, I think this best illustrates the project approach and what we're trying to achieve. I'll give Andy just a moment to bring it up. It frames in one question what I've stated in 3 or 4 questions, but it captures it just the same. It's helping the council and the school board better understand, do we have the facilities today and in our plan for the future, the facilities that we need, I'm talking about school buildings, in the locations that we need them relative to how our city's growing, based on the condition of the facilities today, the remaining useful life, how they're aging, the existing capacity, the educational adequacy based on how the facilities are being used. And this big one that I think Mr. Duman and Mr. Mitnick are hitting on is anticipated population change. As we see new housing development or development that's either committed or we call it pipeline development, how can we analyze that data to answer that question? Do we have the facilities on the ground or in the plan that respond to those verifiable data points? So I think it's a great approach, and I'm looking forward to working with the school board staff on this.
Mr. Roberts?
Please.
Some of that. And I definitely would agree with that. I also would add that based on the results of the study, that's going to be the evidence that we're going to use for actionable items. And then the only challenge we're going to have to look at as both groups is the best return on investment for us. Kind of gets back to what we're saying from RRMM and looking at if it's going to be renovation versus rebuild, location, et cetera, but to make sure that we're going to be cost effective so that we don't have to do this again in a short period of time. That's going to be the key. I'm glad that Kathy highlighted this slide right here, because these are going to be the details that we're going to be looking for. And so when we're looking at the individual data for each structure, infrastructure, HVAC, age of building, enrollment, projections, et cetera, those are going to be 4 to 5 key characteristics that we're going to have to determine where should we put our dollars. And once we put those dollars there, to make sure that those dollars are going to last for a long time. One of the conversations that I've noticed from both city council and the board from past meetings and discussions you all have had is making sure that our money is going to be used effectively. And we really believe that the outcome of this study is going to at least point us in the right direction. And then once we get that data, we need to make sure that we're going to be efficient in making decisions so we can keep the process moving along. Thank you.
Story?
Yes, the second last slide from the finance, the second presentation on finance, and I think it was the second last slide, talking about the transfer of $585,000.
Would you like Ms. Hanson to come forward for your question?
No, actually, she made reference that you,
Okay, that's fine.
our superintendent could explain more, if you can.
No, and Andy, that's slide 10, I believe.
It's the second one that Ms. Hanson.
It's 10.
Yeah.
Nope, it's not 10.
Four.
There we go.
You got it.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry. Item 10.
That's it.
So, made reference that, Superintendent Gordon, could you speak to those things? Safety systems repairs, what is that about?
That's basically going to be our overall safety to school. That's including cameras. We're also looking at some of our technology infrastructure. We know that for most of our camera systems, we have a lifespan of 5, sometimes 10 years, and they've gotten more expensive. So as we continue to expand our overall security coverage, we're looking at the outside of schools as well. You also see up here with our expansion of fiber, which is going to be our technology base. We know that we still have some broadband issues throughout the city, and with SPS Connect coming on board, we want to make sure that we're kind of proactive on those things. I'm not as educated on the fuel tanks piece. I'll lead it up to Mr. Napier and the rest of the team. But we know that school safety is our top priority, as we've already talked about. So having some of these funds to be able to improve that, we think is going to be really beneficial for the school system.
Could we have Mr. Napier explain the fuel? I think I know, but I just, to make sure everyone is on the same page with that.
He didn't know I was involved.
I'm sorry.
I was hiding. The fuel tanks that we're referring to, if you recall, when we built Bowser and we built Cherry, we had bus fuel tanks that we wanted to go there at the time. That didn't happen, so we'd like to go back now basically and do that. We'd like one at each site, and that's what this money is earmarked for. I believe our plan, and I'd have to speak with our transportation people, but at one time we were going to phase out the fuel tank station at John Yates.
Okay. Any questions, Ms. Story?
Another question, is the school administration office in part of the study?
It is not.
If I can address that briefly, everyone recalls we are in a leased facility, and later on the evening, I'll remind council in the CIP discussion that I have proposed $50,000 to do some study of the school board administration's space needs, and I believe I have shown in the capital plan in about year 3 or 4 construction funding to potentially and to propose to relocate the school board into a city-owned facility or school board-owned facility, but we'll get more along into that planning effort this year.
Any other questions?
I have one
Well,
more.
sure.
The maintenance facilities that we're currently in, that I know part is going to be redone, where Mr. Napier has his office. I've seen it, and it's a little scary. But anyway, is that, do we have plans that will be all out of, is that the old East High School? I'm sorry if it's the old something high school. Help me out here.
East Suffolk Primary.
East Suffolk Primary, over
Okay.
that end of the,
Is there a plan that we are going to be finally out of that totally, that building? Is that somewhere in the plan?
My understanding is the bulk of that work is in phase 2 of the plan. I know the school board updated your CIP back in the fall. I think it's a $8 million. Terry, do you have?
He's right
Yes,
there.
that is phase 2. As you know, phase 1 is going on now. We should be finished with phase 1 in May. We are going to move food services, print shop, textbooks, archive records into that building this coming summer. The maintenance facility and the maintenance department we can't split our operation between two locations, even though the office portion of that for us is in Phase 1. The warehouse, shop, everything that our people need to do their work, that is in Phase 2. So once we complete Phase 2, then the entire maintenance department, facilities department will move over to Mount Zion, and at that point, the Freeney Avenue location will be empty. Yes, Mrs. Stories visited us. She enjoyed it very much, I think.
did. That was
Yeah.
thoroughly enlightening.
Yeah.
And just as a reminder, Phase 1 has a total cost of $5 million. That's been funded in 2 appropriations by council. I believe you funded $4 million to that 2 years ago, and I believe $1 million in the current year. So the Phase 1 has been funded by the council at about $5 million, and that is, again, taking place at the site of the old Elephant's Fork.
All right.
Outside.
Mount Zion, thank you.
Mount
I'm sorry.
Zion.
Glad you're listening. You weren't- Make sure, let's just check, make sure you're listening. That's it.
Oh, was it really?
I didn't say anything.
And so is Phase 2 on that same property?
Yes.
Okay.
Councilman Fawcett?
Yes, just one question. There's a vast interest in the community of Driver to remove the old Driver Elementary School, which was anticipated when the 2 schools were built on the north end, being the new Florence Bowser and also the Fred Cherry School. I know there's no appetite for the community to do anything but see that school on the ground and for that to be turned back over to the city, and I believe the city has a vast interest in doing some other things with that property to enhance the neighborhood through athletics and different things at this particular point that could help that area out. The school is in deterioration. It's going to sit there and continue to deteriorate. It's a disaster for someone to come in and make it as a homeless place. The kids are going to eventually take a hold of it, and you're going to have broken windows and everything. So the more it sits there and does nothing, the more we're going to see that kind of go down in the neighborhood. I've asked this a couple of years in a row now, and I think it's time to put all the what-ifs behind and move forward and get that school down on the ground and get it back over to the city so we can do something with it other than sit there and look at a building that's doing nothing but throwing, I think at this point they're using it for storage, but I'm not sure that's a valid point. I think there's other areas they could put that storage and free that building up and get it on the ground. Take that money that's costing you, whether it's nickels and dimes or whatever it is, and let us get it back into the system that can benefit you in some of your school projects down the road. Because I don't foresee, I know at one time there's a table of $4 million out there to try to rehab that school and do some other things with it, and I find it hard to believe that we would take that kind of money and put it back into that school at this particular point. And I certainly would not be in favor of that at this point when we have other needs that we need to accomplish with some of these other schools that need repairs, additions, so on and so forth. So let's take a good hard look at it. The school board has to make that move and get it over to our city manager, and let's see if we can do something with it to make better use of that facility and enhance the neighborhood a lot more than what that school is doing at this point. Thank you.
I'll ask Dr. Gordon to maybe ask Mr. Napier to address that.
Yeah, Ms. Napier, you wouldn't mind coming back up, but I'll give an intro as you're walking up. It needs to be green. Thank you. A lot of that's going to depend on the completion of Phase 2. I mean, that's really what's going to come down to. Would like to keep our maintenance department whole. Mr. Napier has given similar feedback that he gave Ms. Story about the condition of that building, but until Phase 2 is completed, we're kind of hamstrung on holding off on the complete move and a potential turnover back to the city. But Mr. Napier, if anything you want to add to that?
Are we talking about Driver now, or? Okay.
Yes, sir.
We do currently use the Driver facility as a warehouse. My fear would be that if we close that prematurely, we don't have anywhere to put anything. We lost our storage facility at Mount Zion, which we were using. So if we take away Driver at this point, we're going to run into a situation where we can't put surplus furniture, we can't put items that we can't store anywhere else. My facility on Freeney Avenue, as they mentioned, it was East Suffolk Primary School. We can't keep a lot of stuff in there. It's also not climate controlled. So we run into that issue where driver is. Now, I will admit that the things that we are keeping at driver at this point are surplus. Furniture, there's some paper goods in there, stuff like that, that we probably won't use in the long term. But until it's all gone, and we're assured that we're not going to have anything else that needs stored, that's the only facility that we have to do that in right now. It would be better for us if we could hold off on that as long as possible, finish Phase 2, and then as soon as Phase 2 is finished, that includes a warehouse. We can move anything and everything that we need into that new warehouse, and then driver would be free. We could do anything we wanted to do with that property at that point. And hopefully, that's not too far down the road. I just threw that plug in there for Patrick.
Thank you.
One other question. If you could you tell me how much of the capacity of the building's being used for storage? What's the percent?
Now, probably at this point, it's closer to 70-75% at this point.
And it's being utility, correct, with heat there, or?
There is partial heat, partial cooling there. We are not operating all of the, it's a rooftop unit school, meaning that each space has its own unit. We're not operating all of those units at this point. We're not even doing a lot of maintenance on those units at this point. So we're probably at about 50% capacity on heat and cooling, but it's enough for us to use it for storage.
So there is some sense of climate control for what you're
Yes.
keeping there. Understood.
Can I have one other question? Could someone provide me with the cost of what it's taken to run that school for storage only on a day-to-day basis, by week, month by month? I'd like to have the cost factor.
I think that's something we probably need to talk about as a council and as a board, because I don't even know that that's available. I mean,
I know we can give you the monthly cost for the electricity that's used there.
Right.
There's essentially no water being used at this point by the school division. The only water that's being used there is Bennis Creek Little League because they operate off of our meter. So other than that, there's nothing else there. So the electrical cost at this point is going to be minimal. The water cost also minimal. It's not costing, I don't think the outlay here is a lot in terms of keeping it open at this point, simply because of the way that we're using it.
It's just a question of space, is what you're telling us.
Yes. Now, we could get the cost.
And if you,
I have asked for that cost as well.
Dr. Brooks-Buck?
Well, the truth is, if it's a matter of storage, you're going to have to pay for storage somewhere. I would assume that a rental space would cost, there'd be storage costs as well. So whether we're paying our own storage from our own utilities in a building that we currently own, or whether we rent storage space from somewhere else, is going to cost some money. I don't know that there'd be a savings from just paying our part of the utility bill for the rooms that we use, that we can control the heating and air conditioning, or whether we pay for rental space. I'm not sure of what we gain from either one of those.
Like I said, these are conversations we can have. I think we know what the situation is, and I did not hear anything in the study that has anything to do with that school, so it appears that school is not in the future. So I would say we kind of know where we are with that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the superintendent and I have some shared common goals on that. You'd like to no longer have to rely on that facility, and we just want to talk between now and the CIP about how the investment in Phase 2 stacks up against all the other priorities that we'll identify over the next 6 months or so.
Good. Well, one other
Councilman
question for
Duman?
Mr. Harbour, if you would. Within the scope of your study, when you are analyzing these facilities, if you will, are you taking into consideration any opportunities for joint use? In other words, joint use facilities with the city? Maybe we could offer additional recreational activities. We have several joint use centers now, so if we're looking at renovations, moving or whatever, or augmenting to the size, it would be good to know if in a particular area we could adapt it for a joint use facility, because we are sorely needing that type of thing. We have one at Kings Fork Middle, and where else we have joint use?
Northern Shores.
Northern Shores.
Northern Shores. So basically, just
Yeah, there's a number of them.
talking about, the study being at large within the scope, I'd definitely like to be able to address
Sure.
joint use possibilities also.
We'd be happy to include that as part of the criteria in any one of the schools that you want to look at.
Board Chair Mitnick?
Mr. Harbour, on your master sheet that you had of all of the buildings,
Yes, sir.
did you include the 2 new schools in that sheet?
No, sir.
Isn't there, I mean, I know we're facing population at Colonel Fred Cherry right now where it's almost at capacity. And to me, it seems like it should be included.
Well, the area is, as far as the enrollment projections, is included, but the school itself, we have the good documents, new, fresh documents that has all the information that we need about those facilities. So it's probably beneficial to you not to include those since we already have that information.
So you're including the population density and all of that piece, you're just not
Yeah, the
including the
demographics is
facility.
citywide.
Facilities are
Yes.
new, so I think we're getting what you're looking for there, Mr. Mitnick.
Yeah. And we may find that growth is, that's the reason some of those schools were built in those areas, because you have growth out there. So we'll look at continuation of that growth to see what impact it has.
Any other
Sure.
questions? Comments? Dr. Gordon?
To beat a dead horse, we're really looking for any objections right now, any concerns that would prevent us from moving forward. I think the contract is circulating through my office. After City Council takes action on items 9 and 10 on the agenda tonight, I will execute the contract and we'll get to work immediately. So barring any concerns with the approach or any of the specifics we're going to look at, we will move forward very aggressively and update the board and council periodically.
Great.
Pat, I just encourage us to move with his timeline. Let's keep this thing going by the end
Yeah, I
of
was
the
going
year.
to say, we need to get into
We're
it, and as we
way
get
past
into it,
time.
I'm sure we'll have questions and we'll have concerns, but that's where we're going to be, the steering committee, and I assume Dr. Gordon and Pat are going to keep us very well apprised of what's going on, and this is the first step, so I
Pretty
think,
ambitious.
I think this is a huge step for our city, and I think it will give us the information we need to know to make the right decisions for the future.
Mayor Johnson, do you,
Yes, please.
and Chairwoman Byram, are we anticipating keeping our quarterly meetings going, joint meetings like this for the following year?
I see no reason why not.
Great.
think that
Could
was-
we get those on the calendar so that they're set, so it happens quarterly? That would be great.
I'm going to defer to the manager and to Dr. Gordon, because, their timelines kind of have a lot to do
Right,
with this.
so could we get that on the calendar for 2020?
I'll commit, we can look at the potential of that. Oftentimes, depending on the subject matter, the information we present, if it's relevant to any other work cycle, it may be to the advantage to move the meeting sooner or later. We'll look to, and I'll talk with the council leadership about whether or not we could set a hard and fast schedule, but we tend to schedule them
Something
around
tentative for
topics.
4
Yeah.
times?
And one of the reasons why this one is where it was because we wanted to have the study ready to bring forward when we did this. So we can certainly meet, but we want to make sure these meetings have content and meet, and
That's the point.
that your time is well taken here, that we get done what we need to do.
Yeah, Mayor Johnson.
Yes.
My only question, and I don't have a problem having the quarterly meetings either, but if we continue with the timeline that's been proposed by RRMM, we won't have any data, real data until August. So I wouldn't suggest that we would do anything.
That would not be our topic.
Right.
We would have other topics that we could discuss at the quarterly meetings. So we somewhat committed, Dr. Gordon, prior to your entry, that we were going to open the communication lines between the board and the council, and I think that is a good thing, and I think it's working well. So yes, I do think we should continue it.
Thank you.
Is there anything else to come before us?
I'd like to say a couple
Yes,
of
ma'am.
things. I just commend all of us for being here today to start this procedure. RRM, we have worked, with you a lot in the past, and we know your caliber of work. We appreciate all you've done in the past, and I look forward to this because I think this will be eye-opening not only to us, but to the community as a whole. We need this so that we can plan for the future, the school board as well as city council. And I think this is an excellent move for this body to take, two bodies to take. And as far as working together, we work very closely, all of us here, Vice Mayor, Vice Chair. We all are working very diligently towards these things. And we look forward to the future because I think this will give us a way to look into the future and see what will be best for our city and for our school system. Thank you.
And I totally concur. You know, this is being proactive instead of reactive, and I think too often we've been reactive. So here we go into making our future for our students, and that's what we really want to do. We want it to be the best we can possibly be. I had someone say to me the other day that we've done all these things in our city, and, you know, the schools are the piece that we really want to get absolutely right, because at that point, there will be no stopping anything. So, you know, I just want to thank everyone for your time, your commitment, for your efforts, for caring, because we wouldn't all be here if we didn't care very much about this. So I look forward to the study. I'm sure it will have a lot of good information, and if there are pieces that we don't understand or that we need further, I'm sure that we can probably ask to get them. So with that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you for coming.
Good meeting.